he said, once your character gone, gal, that's it. You're gone, you know.
Yeah.
So you're always aware of who you are, what you do. And also she would say, you know, don't forget the family name. Remember the family name. So every time you leave the house, she said, remember the family name. So it's about understanding who you are and who you belong to and where you're coming from.
We are just getting started. My friend, by the way, this is Success Caribbean Style online radio podcast. And you're listening to the show with your host and your coach and your guide, Kingsley Grant. And on today's show, you are going to hear from our guest who is going to take an angle of sharing with us about life, love, and business through a lens that I've never heard before on this show. As a matter of fact, not often do we hear people using cultural dialects to really teach on these topics, but today our guest will be doing just that. This is episode number 016. That is successcaribbeanstyle.com/016. And there you'll find any mention of links or how to find more about the show. That's where you need to go and find out about that. Before we get into that, can I just ask you to make certain that on the Facebook page at Success Caribbean Style that you've liked the page, but also invited someone to like the page as well and engage with us there on the page. Whenever you listen to an episode, this one or any other episode, would you make sure the guest that was on that show hear from you? I've seen some interaction there already. It's great to see that you're making some comments and letting the guests know what you experienced in listening from the show, and I really appreciate that. So again, go to facebook.com/Success Caribbean Style and like the page there as well. And don't forget to make sure you subscribe to the show on iTunes or whichever platform you're listening in. Subscribe to the the podcast, so that whenever any new episode comes out, you will have it right away. But also, it's one way to make sure that this show becomes more popular. So with that said, I'm saying thank you very much for joining me today on this show. Now, let's get the show started. Our guest today is Lorlett Hudson. Lorlett joins me on Success Caribbean Style online radio podcast, the show to the Caribbean people, for the Caribbean people, and about Caribbean people who have overcome the odds and achieved some measure of success. It is designed to entertain, empower, and inspire you, the audience, on how you can do the same. Lorlett is known as the What Next Coach, helping senior leaders, CEOs, and entrepreneurs produce powerful results in their professional and personal lives. Inventor of the multi-award-winning Things Mama Used to Say, Jamaican Proverbs cards, internationally recognized brand in the development of creativity, innovation, and human potential. British Female Inventors and Innovators Awards, National Wave Makers Awards, Sherry Blair Foundation Business Mentor, member of Curvature, the Future 500 Top Talents in the UK, and on awards achievement Lorlett is piling up. Today we have her on Success Caribbean Style, and she'll tell you more about some of her own achievements. So how are you doing?
Hello, Kingsley. I'm fabulous. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me on Success Caribbean Style. And I want to get this first thing out the way. Lorlett, is what country are you representing?
Well, I was born in Jamaica. I now live in the UK, so you can say I'm a global citizen. So an aspect of me is Jamaican, and aspects of me is the UK.
Okay, all right. So, but I want to do basically then, for our listeners in the Caribbean, we're going to put the Jamaican piece into play today, right? For the sake of our audience. All right. So I want to ask this question that I ask all my guests, Lorlett, and it's this: why should someone who visit Jamaica why would they want to visit Jamaica? What would you suggest they see, do, or have? Is a must see, must do, or must have as they visit Jamaica?
Be with the local people, really get into the local people. And the reason why I said that, I was brought up in a rural part of Jamaica. And, that experience has enabled me to be who I am today. It's the spirit of Jamaica. It's the collaboration. It's how people live. The rural part of Jamaica give you the spirit of Jamaica. That's my experience. Find a rural part and be with some local people, and that will enable you to get the real true spirit of Jamaica.
Awesome. I agree. I grew up in the rural part myself too, and sometimes when I go back to visit and I go to the tourist section, I'm thinking, man, they're missing out on the real deal, because you don't get to see the rawness and the of a country. So, what would also be something you would say that they must do or must have an experience?
Well, you got to have some real country food. What I mean by that, you actually get the natural food. There's no chemical in it.
Yeah.
Organic.
Yeah.
So everything you get, it's natural. And you get an older person to cook it. An elderly person. That's to die for. Another thing I would say, I grew up on cornmeal pudding.
Yeah.
And we used to call it hella top, hella bottom, hallelujah in the middle, So to me, you have to have some caramel pudding with the flushy top, yeah?
I'm going to get into that in a little bit more so, because I want to also hear about your favorite dish. But before we get there, I want to just mention this because our show is focused on entertaining, empowering, and inspiring the audience on how they can overcome obstacles and achieve their dream. I wanted to hear some of your own story of migration. So you mentioned you were raised in the rural area. So tell us a little bit about your migration story, just a synopsis of that, and then we get into that later on. But what was that like for you?
Well, being brought up in a rural part of Jamaica, what I really appreciate it's my informative years, from a young child growing up, all the basic fundamental core skills that one needs to be self-reliant, self-leadership. And I left Jamaica being able to understand Shakespeare, Longfellow, because the village school were absolutely, I would say, laid the foundation for me coming to the UK. My grandmother set me up, in a way that when I arrived here, I was way ahead of many young people in schools at my age.
Yeah.
And the only thing that I found quite challenging was the weather. In terms of culturally, I was able to navigate myself around the system because, my grandmother, she laid the foundation. I knew by the time I got here what to expect, how to behave. And, culturally, I was set up.
Yeah.
And as I said, what was missing for me was the weather and a different way of life. But, it was inbuilt in me, knowing how to navigate myself around the system.
So it sounds like I'm hearing you're saying, Lorlett, that having someone laying the groundwork and kind of and educating you on the cultural expectation of what it is you might experience helped you then, as you said, about navigating the system, but it helps you to kind of adapt a bit easier than someone who walks into it cold, having no idea. I'm hearing. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and also, I was coming to a family. I was coming to my mom.
Yeah.
Who lived there for a very long time. So it wasn't like I was coming to a strange land, not knowing anyone. And the other thing is, they belong to a very close-knit Caribbean community. So, I had siblings, I had peers around me around the same age. And also around that time, 1969, many individuals were just coming up. So there was a culture of many young people coming from the Caribbean. So, there was a kind of commonality and a bit of excitement. So when you arrive, people want to know more about you. So to me, the experience was like a novelty, really.
That's really, I like that idea, because I think sometimes that makes the transition a bit easier, as you described. So it sounds like you had a better experience transitionally than some other people may have. So when you got to the UK, Lorlett, what might be I'm not sure if you then missed anything much, because you were in a setting that tend to almost like looks like, what you left home. But was there a dish that you missed from Jamaica when you went to the UK? And also, is there a phrase that you remember that has stayed with you over the years, and what that phrase is and what does it mean? So what did you miss as far as food or a dish, and what phrase have stayed with you all these years, and what does it mean?
Food, definitely. We used to go to the river and, we used to catch fish and things like that. So, you miss that kind of lifestyle. Also, my grandmother, her cooking. I love my grandmother's cooking, and didn't taste the same, So at the time, you couldn't get yam and green bananas.
Right.
You can, but it wasn't as popular as it is now. I mean, you can get anything you want from the Caribbean now. So when you do get a piece of breadfruit, it's excitement.
Yeah.
When you do get some green bananas, it's excitement, So, yeah, I mean, the national dish, like ackee, and saltfish, when you do get it, it's a bit of a novelty, really. So, yeah, definitely, I missed that.
Okay. And what about a phrase that's, which I want to mention, because I had some ackee and saltfish maybe about 3-4 weeks ago, and actually about 3 weeks ago. And man, I'm telling you, I eat it very, very, it's seasonally, because we don't have it all the time. But we have a tree in our backyard, so we can go and pick the ackee and then, prepare it and all that, which was wonderful. And that meal was so delicious. So is there?
I know.
I don't mean to have you, water in your mouth. I'm not trying to do that to you, but I just had to kind of get that. I'm so sorry.
I got it.
Okay.
Yeah, in terms of a phrase.
Yeah.
My grandmother, I would say she was the equivalent of John Maxwell in terms of John Maxwell, the leadership guru. I love his work as a leader. And, he talks about leadership is really about influence.
Yes.
And my grandmother, I would say, now when I discovered personal development, I realized that all the proverbs that my grandmother used to tell me, they were all leadership skills about how I live my life, how I navigate my life. Mm-hmm. So, for example, when beggar beg from beggar, I'm never get rich, And for me, it's about look at who you surround yourself with. Now, look at who you associate yourself with. Look at your associates, And if you don't associate with the right people who's going to take you from A to B or to help you to move up the ladder, then obviously that's it. So when I go into schools and I do leadership program with young boys specifically, I say to them, depending on who you surround yourself with, you're not going to get to where you need to get to. So it's important to look at your associates.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I don't remember that phrase, but that is such a powerful phrase. When beggar beg from beggar, they never get rich. And that's really, wow, that is one of those leadership skill about who you surround yourself with, as you're describing so well. So your grandmother was a pioneer in her days of leadership. Even those phrases she would constantly drill into you, and I'm sure your other family members. So that's awesome. So as you then transitioned and you got into the system, what was it like for you in getting, taking that Jamaican culture and how things were and how you understood life. Now you're in a bigger place with, and so on. What was it like for you in adapting and assimilating into that cultural mix? What kind of things you experienced, if any, and how did you navigate that?
One of the things I got, it's the confidence and the resilience. I was a single mother at 17. So, I have to navigate myself around the system with a young child, studying, making sure that, I'm able to take care of my child and myself in the process. And what I really got, again, it's that upbringing that my grandmother gave me. Tough as things might be, you don't have money for electric, you don't have money for gas, you have to be out there battling out in the cold. You wake up in the morning, the snow is up to your knee or further, whatever else. But regardless of what was going on, those fundamental things, you learn to navigate yourself around the system. And there's a proverb from that. There's a proverb, sometime you have to climb around the barricades, have to find a way to climb over those barricades. And so it enables me to realize that, things are challenges and times are hard, but you've got to find some innovative way to survive. And I put it down to my socialization with my grandmother that has enabled me to. I'm not saying that things weren't hard. I'm not saying they weren't tough. I'm not saying they weren't challenging, because of course they are, But for me, what I really got looking back at it now is that they were focused, they were commitment, and looking at where I was coming from. They were very entrepreneurial people. They didn't sit back and think, oh, well, my life is tough or hard. Whatever they had, they made the most of it.
You are touching on some very important points there, Lorlett, and I want to kind of explore in a few minutes some of those things you mentioned, because I think that the idea of how, the word entrepreneur is kind of new, but we knew that people were business people, and even sometimes I never even see it that way. My dad never worked for anyone as far as I can remember. And he, raised all six of us, had us go through, great schools and all the different things like that. And yet it's just in the recent years, I really associate the word entrepreneur to my dad and realize he was very entrepreneurial and very innovative to make things happen a little bit. You have a little bit, but you make things happen and let it work for the whole family. So in that respect, I want to ask, what is your definition? Because there's so many definitions out there about success, and maybe from your grandmother's upbringing and teaching, or your own experience. How would you define success at this point?
For me, success is being able to wake up in the morning feeling really good about myself. You know what? I feel good about myself, regardless of what's happening. The bank is on my back. The tax man is on my back. Everybody is on my back. But being able to be a contribution to someone and feel good about myself doing that. So being able to wake up every day and recognize I have something of value, that I can add value to someone and I can make a difference to someone. To me, that is success.
So you are talking about the idea of something of value. When did you recognize that you had something of value? And what was that you now realize you now have for someone?
Well, I think I've always been someone that likes to give and like to support, right? And again, it comes from being brought up in that community where, I was brought up knowing what it's like to be of service. And I'll give you an example of my grandmother. She would have one mint ball. And what she would do, she would put this one mint ball in a towel, right? And she would get a hammer and crush it. And every child around her would have a piece of that mint ball, Wow. So from a child, I was, really brought up knowing what it's like to be of service. And so when I decided to set up my business in 1999, 2000, I decided to call the business One Hand Can't Clap, right? Because that's the saying that my grandmother always talked about, one hand can't clap. Always remember, it's impossible for anyone to do anything great by themselves, you know. So that concept has remained with me. And all the way through, you know, I do believe that you will only get results through people. I love Zig Ziglar, what he said, you know, if you give everybody what they want, then you never need anything. You never want anything, you know. So all the personal development gurus, I discovered personal development in 1997 when somebody introduced me to a personal development course. And I was sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is another level in comparison to the way I was brought up. You know, it's just another way. It's just another way of looking at it.
Yeah.
And so I decided to myself that I would teach people in my community to value what is really theirs, the way we were brought up, and not feel ashamed of it according to how many of us were brought up, you know, in terms of it's Black English, you know, don't speak it, don't speak that way, don't be that way. When you really get down to cultural intelligence, it was really about helping us to navigate ourselves in a historical way. Historically, if you think about how the language was created on the plantation, you know, they had to make sure that this language was used in such a way that the slave master wasn't able to understand what was being discussed. So, for example, you know, I could be standing next to you, Kingsley, and I'm saying, wall of ears. And what that means is, shut up, stop talking. You never know who might be listening. So it's that level of discretion, you know. Be mindful of what you're saying, wall of ears, you know, because otherwise you might not live to see tonight.
That, you know, it's also almost like code language developed to survive. And that's where I think sometimes when people in even community and in, you know, certain areas, they had to find a way, how do we do this? And I think the whole innovation idea comes into play. And I know that's one thing I realized, Lorlett, because I get from the Caribbean, you know, and I don't know how you can help me to understand this reconciliation, because we grew up, most people I speak to, recognizing that the pursuit of academics, you know, that's the major area, but also becoming a certain prestigious individual. So, you know, if you deviate from being a doctor, lawyer, banker, you know, MBA kind of a person, then you are not fitting the narrative of the culture. So how would you then talk about what you're doing? Because it doesn't seem to fit that, and yet you're successful in what you're doing. But how do you help a person realize that it's not one size fits all, but also you don't have to be what others want you to be if it doesn't fit who you are at the core?
That's a very powerful question. If you look at the way the world is changing,
Lorlett is going to continue her story and share a very insightful take on the question I just asked her. But before she does that, I want to take a brief moment to say thank you again for listening to this podcast. It means a lot to me that you do. Also, I want to mention that this show is being sponsored by KingsleyGrant.com. Again, it's been sponsored by KingsleyGrant.com. And I wanted to also, one last thing, is take a moment to say thank you to these people who have left a review and rating on the podcast, the show so far. And it's Yo04 says, fantastic start, a recipe we can follow, 5-star. And it continues, Kingsley Grant not only talks about being successful and from the Caribbean, he showed people how he was doing it in his first episode. He described his thought process and the actions he took to launch the podcast and to set up his website. Then he went out and found successful people from the Caribbean, interviewed them, and they showed us how they do it. What more could you ask for? Another 5-star from Just My Take. Great job. Great job showcasing the stories of successful Caribbean immigrants. My friend, if you have not yet added your voice, please do so by going to successcaribbeanstyle.com/iTunes and leave me your rating and review. Now let's get back to Lorlett as she answered the question about how she was able to do what she's doing that is so much different from what the culture taught us about what it is we need to do as far as our vocation or our career. Here is her answer.
In terms of work, you're talking about the future of work here. Yes, it's great. I mean, I've got a BA in mass communication and also a postgrad in personal development and coaching skills. Mm-hmm. But you need to really understand the creative aspects of everything. If you look at the new businesses which are really springing up now, they are actually tackling the hierarchy of leadership. Mm. Leadership is in a crisis at the minute.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And if you look at the new companies that's happening, if you look at Facebook, if you look at Airbnb, you look at Uber, right? Mm. You look at Amazon, all those new businesses are springing up. Technology is really disrupting the way how people do businesses, right? There was a time when, you might have to consider going into corporate America or corporate the UK. But now, people are becoming more conscious, about the social conditions of their businesses. What business are they going into? And that's where the creativity comes. A lot of young people that I coach are escaping the city. And they're doing things that they actually love. They want the hours, they want the money, they want the time, they want to travel, they want to work from anywhere in the world that they want to. They don't want to be restricted by work. The work ethics that, my grandmother passed down to me, and the work ethics of many of their generation, is disappearing.
Yeah.
Young people these days, you get many individuals who are looking at innovative ways to set up their business. You get 13-year-olds now who are multi-billionaire, operating something from their bedrooms. Mm-hmm. So in terms of what you're asking me, the more innovative, the more creative you can be. And the people who I work with, I teach them to look at their natural skills, the natural talents, what comes to you so natural that you don't have to think about it, and generate an income from that.
Wow. You have just said a mouthful right there. I think you've captured basically what I think is so needed. You mentioned the idea of the leadership is in crisis. You mentioned the fact that, how do you tap into your own core strength? How do you do what you love? How do you experience the freedom, but yet be a contributor to society and feel like you're a producer and not necessarily just a consumer? And I like how you framed that, Lorlett. So I want to ask this question. In your own pursuit of your dream, what would you identify as your possibly greatest achievement so far? And was it something you had envisioned yourself doing earlier on in life?
Not really, no. I mean, I studied communication,
right.
And I realized that I love that whole thing around cultural expression. As a child growing up in Jamaica, storytelling was a big thing. We used to meet up at the end of each day. People used to come and sit on the veranda and they used to tell story like Miss Lou and Mas Run, listen to the radio station. And I realized that, again, many individuals that I talked to did not have that kind of socialization. And so I decided to myself to use that to empower and enable people, through storytelling. And the more I'm thinking about it, I thought, what would it be like to capture some of these sayings when beggar beg from beggar never get rich, you can't sit in a bucket and draw water at the same time. I thought to myself, wow, what would that be like to capture some of them and put them into a box? So I did that, and not knowing whether there was a market, I just had a passion for it. And so I launched them in 2004 at the Jamaica High Commission here in the UK. And in that one night, I sold £3,000 worth. I don't know how much that is in US dollars. So if you was to say double it,
right,
say $6,000.
Right.
in one night, right? So I thought to myself, well, if I can generate £3,000 in one night, just imagine what that would be like. So I got really excited. And then I did a series of road shows, London, Birmingham, Bristol, Leeds, which is all the different regions. And, 250 people come all the time. Then I had the media in tow, being on all the radio station you can think of, BBC radio station, up and down the country. All the broadsheets, the Times, the Guardian. And I just thought to myself, wow, what's going on here, And I've been chased all the time for interviews.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, there's a market here. And what was happening is as well, the story behind it is that the Windrush generation who came here in 1948, a lot of them now are passing away.
Yeah.
And they also leaving this country, going back to wherever they came from. So, the younger generation don't necessarily know this. So my way of operating is actually teaching people cultural, really valuing our culture and understanding why they were created and how. So in my coaching, you get history, you get culture, you get expression, you get storytelling, you get leadership, everything combined into who you are. So, you being a coach, you understand the methodology of be, do, and have, right?
Yeah.
So, who are you being?
Yeah.
Where is your identity? Who are you? What you're up to? What are you doing at any time? And in order to be that, then you can do that, and then you have that.
Yeah.
And if you flip it on its side, what you then have is have, do, be. Most people will tell you, I don't have it, so I can't do it, and I can't be it.
Yes.
So what I then say, well, just look at who you're being. And that's where we start. We start looking at getting related to who you're being, to enable you to do what you want to do in order to have what you want.
And this is such a critical piece because it's the whole alignment process. Because if you're out of alignment in those three components you described, then something's going to be out of whack. And you'll never be able to experience the success and what it is you're meant to be if you don't have those three as you described, Lorlett, in that symmetry, that things happen in that way. So I like the fact that you're giving also that kind of framework for a person to think about. And who am I? Who am I being? What am I doing? And what do you want to have? And that is a great way of following almost a process to possibly experience in life. So you went ahead, took all these sayings and put in a box, and we should call the Proverbs. Let's talk about that. So in that book, it's a book and a box idea. What's in that? What
they are flashcards.
Okay.
They're flashcards. So on one side, you have the Jamaican Proverbs written in Jamaican patois. And then on the next side, you have standard English. So it's around navigating yourself around globalization.
Yes.
So as a global citizen, you're a Jamaican or Caribbean person, you look at the patois and you thought, wow, this is my culture. And then you look on the other side. So you get to be what I call a global citizen.
Yeah.
So there's one side. So no language is better than the other. They're just different.
Yes. That's a piece I find sometimes because, I interviewed a few people on the show, and I remember when I first came to the United States, way back in the late 70s, one of the things that we not had to do, but I found the pressure almost like intrinsically, but also the unspoken pressure was to fit in, so give away almost like dismiss your culture, your language and all those different things to adapt. I know things have changed now where the idea, the beauty of the mixture, the flavoring of all the colors and the creeds, the culture, the songs, the language has made things so beautiful. So in this journey and in your teaching and coaching and speaking, what would you say that looking back, Lorlett, would you say, I wish I had known? And also, what are some lessons you have learned in the process that you would want to pass on to a person who's following, an aspiring person who wants to leave or even use their skill set to achieve what it is they have on their heart?
I think for me, it's really valuing what is really yours. Discover, if I had my life to live over again, it's really being able to have the insight that culture, I think it's Peter Drucker that said, culture eats everything for breakfast, So in other words, culture is the key, really find out what is it about your culture that makes you you, what makes you unique, and embrace that, because wherever you go in the world, your culture is it. And everywhere has a culture. And find out how your culture had value to that culture and how can you add value to that culture. So, for example, working in corporate Britain, there is a culture around standards, where my grandmother brought me up, the way she poured water in a glass, the way how, you look at your appearance. Sometimes when I look at my counterparts, arriving for work, I had to really thought, my goodness, my grandmother, she would definitely have something to say about this. You're coming to work, your shirt's not high-end, So there is a standard. There's a standard that we've been brought upon. Even like on a Sunday, the rest of the week wasn't that important, but on a Sunday, you'd make sure that the table was set, the proper way, the proper way,
yes.
And you couldn't give my grandmother a half a glass of water. You just couldn't do it. It's just not the done thing, You have to be ever so.
Yeah.
And everything has to be ever so, So it's understanding that, she would say it's better to have one dress and it's clean, ironed, and look proper, than have a lot of clothes that just doesn't add up. And even that now I practice. I would rather to spend a lot of money on one handbag, one pair of shoes, and make sure I look the part. I'm not concerned if somebody said, oh, I saw her with that handbag last week. I don't care.
Yeah.
My thing is it's about quality. So it's understanding what is it about your culture that makes you unique.
As I listen to you, and I'm so thankful that you're really bringing some things into play that we don't hear much of lately. And it's like you said earlier, the culture is not that it's better, it's just different. And how can you use your culture and another person's culture and put together and make the world a better place, but also come alongside, make it richer and much more, of course, colorful. But as I listen to you, Lorlett, I'm thinking, man, if the earlier years when I first came to the United States, if I could have maintained and not somehow wanted to get rid of certain things that would somehow, I felt at the time, work against me, realizing, no, it could be my passport into places that I would not get otherwise, and I don't become like everybody else. I have that stands out, and I if I could go back, I would want to redo that one piece. As I listen to you and hear the emphasis on the culture, diversity, but also the value that's been brought, and if you can embrace that, you can really make something of it, like you are doing in the work that you have done. So, what are some things you're working on lately, or that you would say you want the audience who are listening right now, the person listening, to know about?
Well, some of the work that I do, I work with CEOs who are in transition because, leadership is in a crisis at the minute.
Yeah.
I mean, look at what's happening in politics.
Yes.
I mean, you're not going to go too much into politics.
Right.
But, my grandmother would turn in her grave if she see what's going on now.
What would she say? What's one phrase she made? That's what I wonder. What do your grandmother say to what's happening now? And it can go back to you. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
She just said, what kind of fool people them this?
Yes.
Exactly. What kind of fool nonsense is this?
Yeah.
And, you're there to influence people, and the behavior just doesn't work.
Yeah. And
the other thing, again, she'll talk about character. He said, once your character gone, gal, that's it. You're gone, Yeah. So you're always aware of who you are, what you do. And also she would say, don't forget the family name. Remember the family name. So every time you leave the house, she said, remember the family name. So it's about understanding who you are and who you belong to and where you're coming from.
Wow. Lorlett, I'm telling you, you are kind of stirring some things in me as I listen to you, and I'm just like, want more and more and more. You can spend all day listening to all of that. So that is what you're kind of, you're working with leaders and others through the whole transitional process, but also is the idea of reminding them about the culture, about what they do have and how they could utilize those things and their skills and really in the work that they're doing, which I think is so necessary. So where would you say a person who wants to know more about what you're doing and to connect with you, where would the best place you would ask them to go?
They can go to my website, which is www.onehandclanclap.co.uk. I'm also on Facebook as well, Lorlett Hudson on Facebook. And also I'm on Facebook as One Hand Can't Clap. And I'm on LinkedIn as well, Lorlett Hudson.
And I have all the links in the show notes. So as you're listening, you may be thinking that, well, I didn't get a chance to write those down because I'm driving, I'm at the gym, Don't worry. I have in the show notes those links so you can go there and connect with Lorlett, because I'm telling you, you want to know more about what she is saying, because I really am hungry now. She's whet my appetite. I can't wait to put my hand on those flashcards to really say, wow, just reminisce and just sit there in awe and listen to her grandmother through her. So I think it's a great work you're doing. So you mentioned a couple of books that you have found to be very helpful in your journey. What's one book or two books you would recommend to the listener that you would say, hey, this is a book that is almost a must read for you?
Well, there's a couple. I read a lot.
Yeah.
If you're a coach, you got to read. I mean, that's one of the key things. Mm-hmm. You can't be empowering people and not reading. So one of them, I would say, somebody introduced it to me, Think and Grow Rich. Mm-hmm. It's an amazing book. There's a story in there about resilience and desire. And, if you want something that badly, if you can conceive it, you can get it. If you want it that badly. So that's why I like Think and Grow Rich. John Maxwell is an inspirational teacher of mine. And so he's written a book called Develop the Leader Within You. And yes, I would suggest everyone look at your leadership, because we're all leaders. We all can influence. We can make a difference. And sometimes we don't even know that because we don't see ourselves as making a difference. I'm out there talking to parents or I'm talking to individuals and they would say, I'm not a leader. But I said, you are a leader. You influence people every day. Even when I go into schools and run workshops with young people, because I run the Young Leaders Breakfast Clubs. I run them from 8 o'clock in the morning and enabling especially young Black boys to understand they are leaders. When I ask them questions, I don't ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? I don't ask them that kind of question. I said, if you could change the world, if you could transform the world, what would you do? What would you do? And that get them to start thinking, actually, I would like to change my school. I would like to change the curriculum. I would like to change this. So that really get them fired up and inspired. So they get to see themselves as leaders.
That's a very good point you're making, and I'm glad you are kind of wrapping up with that statement, because I do agree. We all have leadership skills. We all lead in one area or another, and the earlier we can recognize that, and I'm glad that you're kind of calling that out in people, because when they recognize that they can and they are, then it changes life for them. So I want to thank you that you're doing that.
And thank you for what you're doing.
Laura, thank you. I want to say a big thank you on behalf of the community here at Success Caribbean Style. You have really, I'm telling you, you have kind of, in my own mind, for me, whether whoever else may benefit, you really have stirred some things and have allowed me to start thinking about some things a bit differently. So again, I appreciate that you're taking the time to do that and really deposit in us a wealth of information. So thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And there you have it, my friend. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I do. To listen to Lorlett as she shared about these lessons that were taught by her grandmother. And they were simple Jamaican proverbs, but how much they have to do with life and love and business, and how it has helped her to launch her own business. Imagine you taking something that you may consider to be just like insignificant, and who would want to hear or experience that? My friend, trust me, you'll be surprised, because there is something called the curse of knowledge, meaning that what you take for granted, what you know, and what you think nobody else would want to hear or even want to know or wanted to do, because everybody does that. No, everybody does not do it. And that's why you need to test out the market to see if you have something that's unique, because it's you, it's your voice, it's your personality, and it's been told or done in the only way you can do it. So my friend, get out there and take something from this episode today and share with the world. The world is waiting. Again, everything you heard in this episode will be at the show notes in successcaribbeanstyle.com/016. And I want to give you because of your loyalty and having to really wait until the end here, I want to just give you a few things that Lorlett has done, because this is so important. For example, you may have heard, if you are from Jamaica, or maybe you may have heard this, even if you're not, but somewhere in the Caribbean. Have you ever heard this? Wanty, can't get it. I'm sorry. Wanty, can't get it. Get it, no wanty. Okay, what does that mean? It means value what you have. Okay? Here's another one. When jankro fly high, in feather drop. Okay, what does that mean? It means be real. Don't be something you're not. Okay, one last one. It's what are for you can be on for you, which means have faith, self-belief. If you really believe that you can achieve, no one can convince you otherwise. These are some sayings that Lorlett has made available. I have a link in the show notes that tell you how to come find them. But it's packaged in this very neat box. I'll have a picture in the show notes. But it's amazing to see what it is Lorlett has put together. But it's a box of cards, really like flashcards that you mentioned in the show, that you'll see. You can purchase these and learn about proverbs like these, but how they are important to life. I know this will really be helpful to you, and I am going to go through these and enjoy them and smile and just really share them at different times on the show. I'll be picking a card and sharing them possibly on the show as we go forward. So you hear more about this as we go. So Lorlett, thank you again for making this available and sending this wonderful gift to me so I can share with my audience on Success Caribbean Style. But my friend, thank you so much for your patience, and I hope, again, you get a lot from this. Make sure Lorlett hear from you. So you can make comments in the show notes at successcaribbeanstyle.com/016 or LORLETT. Lorlett, LORLETT. But if you go to the Facebook the Facebook page at facebook.com/successcaribbeanstyle, you will be able to make comments there and let Lorlett hear from you. With that said, my friend, thank you for your patience. God bless. Peace out. And I'll see you on the Caribbean side. Yeah.